Air France Flight 4590. July 25th, 2000. Charles de Gaulle International Airport, Paris. A huge modern aviation hub, the heart of French aviation and one of the busiest airports in Europe. Every day, tens of thousands of passengers depart from here to destinations around the world. And annual passenger traffic exceeds 50 million people. The length of the runways allows for the acceptance of virtually any type of aircraft, from regional airliners to the largest intercontinental aircraft. This is where Air France Flight 4590 is scheduled to depart today, the supersonic Concorde airliner, created through the joint efforts of France and the United Kingdom, which has symbolized technological progress in civil aviation since the late 1970s. Concorde could cross the Atlantic in just 3.5 hours, which was an incredible achievement in itself. This airliner was no ordinary passenger plane. It was, without exaggeration, a legendary and unique example of engineering artistry that was ahead of its time and became a symbol of an entire era. The Concorde could climb to an altitude of over 59,000 feet, whereas most passenger aircraft fly at an altitude of 33,000 to 39,000 feet. At this altitude, the curvature of the Earth becomes visible, and the sky begins to resemble space. The airliner could fly at speeds of over Mach 2, 1,350 miles per hour. That's twice the speed of sound. These are incredible figures. By comparison, modern airliners fly at speeds of around 560 miles per hour. To better understand the capabilities of the Concorde, it is sufficient to compare it with a military aircraft. For example, with the fourth-generation F-18 Hornet fighter jet, which was widely used by the U.S. Navy. The F-18's maximum speed was only 1.8 Mach, or about 1,180 miles per hour. This is an impressive figure for a combat fighter, but even it was inferior to the passenger Concorde, which was capable of maintaining a speed of 2 Mach, or 1,350 miles per hour. The practical ceiling of the F-18 was limited to 49,200 feet. The Concorde, however, regularly flew higher, up to 59,000 feet. In other words, the passenger airliner flew where military aircraft flew at the limits of their capabilities. This is what made Concorde unique. It was a civilian aircraft, comparable in performance to military aircraft. But unlike a fighter jet, its cabin carried dozens of passengers, luggage, and even black caviar and champagne on board. This combination of speed, altitude, and civilian operation was impressive. The Concorde was not just an airplane. It was a symbol of luxury and belonging to the elite. Celebrities were often spotted on board. Princess Diana and Prince Charles, Mick Jagger and Phil Collins, Elton John, and even world politicians such as Jacques Chirac. It was a kind of club for the select few, and the barrier to entry was the incredible cost of tickets. In the 1990s, a one-way ticket cost more than $20,000 in today's money. Many people saved money for years to experience this feeling at least once in their lives, to find themselves at an altitude of 59,000 feet, in a cabin that may not have been particularly luxurious, but where a rock idol or Hollywood star could be sitting in the seat next to them. Concorde offered not only speed, but also an extraordinary experience. One of the advertising slogans was, "We'll outrun the Earth's rotation." And it was true. The speed of the Earth's rotation at the equator is approximately 1,050 miles per hour. The Concorde flew at a speed of 1,350 miles per hour. This is almost 3 times faster than the speeds at which modern aircraft fly, and allows it to cross the Atlantic in 3.5 hours. It turned out that if you flew out of London in the evening and headed west, passengers saw the sunset and then saw it again in New York. And of course, they could celebrate New Year's Eve several times in one evening. The Concorde was, without exaggeration, an aircraft from the future at that time. Even now, it still inspires admiration and amazement. It wasn't just a beautiful airplane. It was a true engineering breakthrough, comparable, perhaps, to Steve Jobs' first iPhone. The development of Concorde cost the United Kingdom and France almost £2 billion, an astronomical sum for the 1960s and 1970s. If converted to today's money, that's more than $30 billion in 2025. The project was also unique because it was a joint venture between two countries, France and the United Kingdom. It became a symbol of international cooperation, but at the same time, it was a huge financial burden that forever determined the fate of the aircraft. Instead of the usual wing, Concorde was equipped with a thin delta wing. It provided stability and lift at supersonic speeds, allowing the airliner to fly faster and higher than any other passenger aircraft. The Concorde's signature feature is its movable nose. During takeoff and landing, it was lowered so that pilots could see the runway. During flight, the nose was raised to improve aerodynamics, which is very important for reaching supersonic speeds. The Rolls-Royce Snecma Olympus 593 engines were among the most powerful turbojet engines in the history of passenger aviation. Each developed up to 38,600 pounds of thrust with afterburners. Their design allowed them to operate at supersonic speeds for hours, something no conventional airliner could withstand. Just think about it. They consumed between 6,500 and 14,000 U.S. gallons of fuel per hour. When flying at Mach 2, the surface temperature of the aircraft exceeded 250 degrees Fahrenheit. The aluminum expanded, and the fuselage lengthened by 10 inches. There was even a special sensor in the cockpit that showed the temperature of the skin. The Concorde was one of the first airliners to feature an electronic engine control system and elements of what would later be called fly-by-wire. For the 1970s, this was almost science fiction. It was truly a masterpiece of engineering and one of the fastest aircraft in the world. But that did not help it avoid a tragedy that no one knew about yet. The time is 4:30 p.m. The crew of Air France Flight 4590 is completing preparations for takeoff. Crew: Captain Christian Marty, age 54, total flight time 13,477 hours, of which on Concorde 317 hours. First Officer Gianmarco, age 50, total flight time 10,035 hours, of which on Concorde 2,698 hours. Flight Engineer Gilles Giordino, age 58, total flight time 12,532 hours, of which on Concorde 937 hours. All of them had extensive flying experience, including experience flying specifically on Concorde. Weather conditions in the Paris area on that day were favorable for flying. Visibility exceeded 6 miles. Cloud cover was light, and winds were variable at around 9 miles per hour. The air temperature was 88 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a hot summer day, but these conditions were within the normal range for a Concorde takeoff. The crew receives permission to taxi. The snow-white airliner begins to move toward runway 26 right. Dispatchers closely monitor each stage. The departure of a supersonic airliner is always an event in the airport's schedule. Among them that day was Gilles Luzelin, the departure controller. In the next few minutes, he would be accompanying Flight 4590 and would be one of the first to see that something had gone wrong with the plane. Runway 26R, from which the Concorde is scheduled to take off, is over 2.5 miles long, one of the longest in Europe. It is here that virtually all flights of the supersonic airliner were carried out. It is important to note a very important point concerning the weakest point of this aircraft. The Concorde's takeoff speed was significantly higher than that of conventional passenger airliners by approximately 70 to 80 miles per hour. This meant that the aircraft's wheels were subjected to extreme stress. Just 0.04 ounces of rubber from a Concorde tire at takeoff speeds of 220 to 240 miles per hour is comparable to the impact energy of a 7-ounce hammer falling from a height of 12 inches. This feature, which for many years seemed to be just a technical detail, would play a key role in the tragedy. The Concorde on the runway is preparing for takeoff.
Air France 4590, cleared for takeoff. Runway 26 right. Wind 090, 8 knots.
4590, we're taking off from runway 26 right.
4 Rolls-Royce turbojet engines are brought up to takeoff speed. The noise level outside the cockpit reaches 119 decibels, louder than most military fighter jets. The plane begins its takeoff run. The Concorde's acceleration was impressive. In just a few seconds, its speed reached 60 miles per hour, then 90, then 120 miles per hour. The decisive moment was the V1 speed for Concorde, which was about 170 miles per hour, the speed after which takeoff could no longer be aborted. At that moment, everything looked normal. The Concorde continued to accelerate along the concrete runway, its nose beginning to rise slightly in preparation for takeoff.
Concorde 4590, you have a fire behind you. A fire.
Engine number 2 failure. Shut down engine number 2.
Engine fire extinguishing procedure.
Speed.
4590, you have a strong flame behind you.
The landing gear cannot be retracted.
Proceed at your discretion. You have priority for the return.
I shut him down. Speed, speed, speed. Le Bourget. We're trying to make it to Le Bourget.
At 4:44 p.m., the Concorde crashed near the town of Gonesse, just a few miles from Charles de Gaulle Airport. The impact hit the Hotelissimo Hotel, located at the La Patois Transport Interchange. The explosion and fire were so powerful that the building was partially destroyed. All 109 people on board died instantly. 4 people died on the ground, 3 hotel guests and 1 hotel employee. 6 people suffered severe burns. Firefighters arrived quickly, but there was no chance of survival after such a fall. The investigation lasted more than a year. BEA specialists reconstructed the chain of events step by step. The culprit turned out to be a small piece of metal debris, only 17 inches long. This titanium strip had fallen off the engine of a Continental Airlines DC-10 that took off before the Concorde. The strip remained on the runway. When the Concorde accelerated to a speed of about 200 miles per hour, the wheel of the left main landing gear hit metal. The tire pressure on the Concorde was enormous, about 290 psi, higher than any passenger airliner. The explosion happened instantly. A large piece of tire, weighing about 10 to 11 pounds, hit the skin at an estimated speed of about 313 miles per hour. The impact energy was enormous, with the fragment striking the lower surface of the wing in the area of fuel tank number 5. Kerosene gushed out under high pressure through the hole that had been created. The fuel ignited instantly, turning into a huge flame. Fire engulfed the wing. Engine number 2 stalled, and soon engine number 1 began to lose power. The landing gear presented an additional problem. The left strut was damaged, the flap jammed, and the landing gear could not be retracted. The deployed landing gear created enormous drag, preventing the aircraft from gaining speed effectively. The Concorde barely rose about 200 feet and stayed in the air for about a minute before finally losing control. After the crash, many people wondered why the pilots didn't abort takeoff when the flames broke out. First, the runway was almost over and there were buildings behind it. Second, the distance from the runway to the other airport where the crew planned to land was only a few miles. Looking at these images, you can write in the comments what decision you would have made, to take off or to begin emergency braking. The captain made the right decision to continue the takeoff. The crew followed procedures precisely. They shut down the engines, activated the fire extinguishing system, attempted to retract the landing gear, and tried to reach Le Bourget Airport. However, the damage was critical. The loss of thrust in the left engines, the extended landing gear, and the fire made the situation hopeless. BEA emphasizes that the crew is not at fault. Their actions were professional, consistent, and fully compliant with regulations. The disaster was caused by technical and external factors. After the crash, there were many opinions on how such a disaster could have been avoided. Suggestions were made to extend the runway by several miles. It was proposed to install EMAS, Engineering Measures Area System, everywhere, engineering zones outside the runway that are capable of safely stopping an aircraft during rollout. There were even proposals to retrofit aircraft with emergency parachute systems. Incidentally, this system had previously been installed on the Concorde during testing. However, there have been cases of such systems being used on civilian aircraft, albeit for routine aircraft stops. What's more, parachute systems even exist for emergency landings in various flight accidents. For example, the Cirrus Vision Jet aircraft model is equipped with a giant parachute that passengers can activate from the cabin. As a result, the aircraft lands using the parachute system. This is a very unusual engineering solution, and incidentally, there's a 5-year waiting list for this model, despite its cost of $2 to $4 million. A godsend for those who are afraid of flying. To be honest, we cannot verify with certainty whether these engineering solutions would have helped or not. However, we live in the age of information technology, and when modeling this disaster in different neural networks with engineering modifications such as installing EMAS, extending the runway, retrofitting an emergency parachute braking system, we obtained approximately the same results. In the event of an emergency stop with the new parameters, the possible survival rate of passengers and crew was between 75 and 90%. Whether you agree with this or not, please write in the comments. The Concorde disaster was a turning point in the history of supersonic airliners. To get Concorde back into service, engineers made a number of changes. First, the fuel tanks were reinforced with Kevlar linings capable of absorbing impact energy and preventing punctures. Secondly, new ultra-strong Michelin tires were developed that are resistant to bursting under extreme loads. Thirdly, the wiring and hydraulics were reinforced to prevent a recurrence of the fire. The crash of Air France Flight 4590 was the only fatal accident in the history of Concorde operations. Concorde returned to service in 2001 after modifications were made, but passenger demand had fallen sharply and operating costs had risen. In 2003, Air France and British Airways officially retired the aircraft, ending the era of supersonic passenger travel. To sum up, we would like to share one thought. Technological progress is advancing. New horizons are being conquered. Cars are becoming faster. Computers are becoming more productive. And in the case of Concorde, even decades later, people will say something like this: "There was a time when people flew several times faster than the speed of sound. That was a long time ago and will probably never happen again."